Well, hello everyone. Welcome back. This is our last video together for Module 3. I'm going to complete our discussion of the Indus Valley Civilization, and I remind you that you're reading, particularly the DIE reading, DYE, in the module in the Indus Valley Civilization in relation to foundations of great religions on the Indian subcontinent, has an excellent overview and discussion of this civilization. And I also have some more general selections of reading that cover this civilization. Lastly, there is a very important text that you need to read in that module, which covers the arts of the Indus Valley or Harappan civilization. All of this sits together in the module you're in right now. Don't miss anything, because this is a critical foundational unit that we will be building upon in our next module. And it's all on one page because it's related. What we're doing here now is I'm focusing in on several kinds of works of art in the Indus Valley or Harappan civilization. Again, we use those terms interchangeably because scholars are debating the right terms. And so some texts have Harappan civilization, some use the term Indus Valley civilization, which is an older convention. So we will use both interchangeably. Let us share the video, okay? Again, as always. So I left you on our last video in a discussion of this lovely sculpture that is made of marble, that is a beautiful example of Harappan sculpture in Mohenjo-Daro, that very important Indus Valley city that our module also has a nice documentary, short documentary about. I'd also begun discussing these very small seals. And these, as I said in the previous module, but I'll go over it again, this is what we find as archaeologists and students of the ancient world and the earliest civilizations in Mesopotamia and in the Indus Valley. We find these 1 by 1 inch or even smaller cubes or structured forms that are in the negative, and they're carved into the negative space in a stone. And here we're looking at soapstone or stearite, which is quite common in the Indus Valley. And so these are used as stamps onto clay, typically, to produce an imprint that becomes a badge and a marker, and it could be related to trade, it could be related to status, it could also mark ownership. But there are thousands of these in the Indus Valley and also in the ancient civilization along the Tigris and Euphrates, which we call Mesopotamian civilization. And it's likely that, if not certain, that the Indus Valley civilization took this innovation from the Mesopotamian world. Certainly, if not, they certainly traded, because we find these seals in Mesopotamia and we find Mesopotamian seals in the Indus Valley. So they're trading with each other, definitely. This is a fantastic image of a wild or a domestic animal, but it has a single horn, so it's sometimes called a unicorn, but that's what the Metropolitan Museum calls it, so we'll call it a unicorn. But it's important to understand that this unicorn is probably a little bit different than the unicorn you're used to thinking about in European medieval traditions. You can see this imprint, this seal, has a very beautiful heart-shaped quilter harness here in the frontal part of it, which is quite elegant. And the Indus script, we know, was invented. Script, by script I mean language, We know it was invented around 2600 BC, but it is yet to be fully deciphered. Maybe one of you will become a scholar of this beautiful material and help and contribute to solving one of the many mysteries of the ancient world. So these are called pictographs, and that means that the language is structured around pictures. And so that's what we refer to as pictograms or pictographs. So this summarizes what I've already said. They number in the thousands, and they have been discovered in excavations in Indus cities as well as in the Persian Gulf. The Persian Gulf is what we call the area that was once Mesopotamia, is now is referenced here as the Persian Gulf. Seals from the Gulf regions have similarly been found in Indus cities. So I'm just repeating what I just said using using the modern geographical place naming rather than the ancient. So here is the details. I like to, in some cases, when I'm talking at length about a visual work of art, I like to not have the text and then go to the text a little bit later. It's in New York, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Front and back of, this is the front and back of a seal with the two-horned bowl. You can see the two horns here, and then inscription. Clearly, some pictographic language is being used here. It's a figure, and then the scaling of a ladder-like form, and it's hard to say what this is, like perhaps an animal on its side, but it's the experts no doubt are collecting and trying to make sense of these pictographs. This is the reverse of this particular seal, which is at the Cleveland Museum of Art. Steatite is another word for soapstone. It's a very soft, easily carved stone. This is actually the back, and it is indicating that it's got a hole running through it, so it can be hung around the neck, around a bushel of wheat, around, it's like a tag, so to speak, as well as an emblem. So reading Indus seals, I've already stated this, but seals include inscriptions in the form of pictograms. I've written that out for you, and here they are again. These are really clearly defined pictogram here, and then in its positive form printed, you can see how sharp this pictogram registers in an imprint. Even after such a long time, it still produces a very fine imprint. And you notice here the saddle is a little bit more sharply defined, but it's very similar to the form we saw at the Metropolitan Museum of Art a moment ago. Even more about the Indus script is we can use this nice seal at the Louvre Museum in France. It's quite old, dating to 2600s to 1700 BC. It's discovered in, it's an Indus cylinder seal. By cylinder seal, that means that I don't have the negative here, but it means it is in a cylinder form, and the imprint runs all the way around and it's rolled. And so if you look up cylinder seal here, if you're curious, it's a decent search on the internet will lead you into a little cylinder shaped form with a carving in the negative all the way around, and then these would be rolled to allow for a little bit more information than simply the stamp. So that's another type of seal. The reason I brought this in is because this particular diagram shows the script itself and the cataloging that is done by archaeologists and people who are studying, scholars who are studying the Indus Valley civilization and tracking these different pictographic forms in the hope that one day they can decode them. That would be really exciting. Again, I already mentioned this, but Indus seals were likely important components of trade. We have found traces of rope on positive imprints of the seal that suggest they may have been used to brand fastened bundles of merchandise. It has also been theorized that the inscriptions on the seals indicate ownership and that the animals are emblems that referenced particular persons and merchant guilds. That's one theory. This seal is mentioned in your reading, but I'm going to go over it a little bit more. It's 2500 to 2400 BC. It's again soapstone or steatite, but it's coated with alkali and baked, so it gives it a harder form. And this is in the Mohenjo-Daro, the Indus Valley civilization, and it's one of the treasures of the National Museum in Delhi. Some of you chose works of art from there for your first assignment. So going back, incised on this small stone, less than 2 inches across, we see a large figure seated on a dais, that's like a kind of like a throne, surrounded by a horned buffalo, a rhinoceros, and an elephant. Elephant, rhinoceros, horned buffalo. And here looks to be, and a tiger. Beneath the platform here are stylized deer that may be perhaps decorative. The figure itself is horned. And remember, we're looking now, let's move forward. Okay, remember this is in the negative. It's not easy to see because it's the photograph is difficult. So the figure's frontality and symmetry seems to suggest we should approach this figure with deference. And deference meaning prayerfulness and humility, and as one who is approaching a figure of power. And the deeply curved horned headdress suggests an important and powerful role. And the figure looks to be wearing perhaps several necklaces. Reading the Indus seal, scholars variously have referred to this figure as both male and female with multiple heads and no multiple heads. So it's a big source of debate. It's most frequently described as a Pashupati seal after an epithet for the Hindu god Shiva. That means Lord of the Beasts. The figure's apparent mastery over wild animals is thought to be implied by the type of animals, that is the buffalo, rhinoceros, elephant, and the tiger, all very strong animals included in the seal. The pair of relatively, let's just move forward, stylized deer below are somewhat unknown. Is this an early form of Shiva? So you all don't, unless you're familiar with Hindu beliefs and gods and goddesses, wouldn't know who Shiva is, and we're going to get to that later in this class. But we know, and we're touching on this in this module, that ancient Vedic, and that is a culture that follows after the Indus Valley civilization, that the figure on the seal is an ancient Vedic form known as Rudra that would be later named the Hindu god Shiva. So this ancient form may be connected to early understandings of a kind of Shiva prototype or precursor to what we understand to be Rudra and then later Shiva, or something similar. So that is a strong theory. The physical pose, let's see it go forward. There's some, well, you can read this for yourself. There are some problems with that interpretation, and I've listed it here. You can pause your video and read that. And here you can see the positive imprint of it and the negative, so you can see the two together. Notice this very stretched hieratic pose in the hands. It's very much like a yogic pose that we will be learning about when we turn to the Vedic civilization, the influence of Vedic culture and ultimately Hinduism and the role of yoga and the yogic as part of that system of thought. And then here finally is another of this kind that we can see this very hieratic form. So I'm running out of my quota of 15 minutes for the YouTube video, but the cylinder seal is, these seals, both cylinder and these imprint seals, are a very important way in which we understand a mysterious civilization about which we don't have a great deal of understanding simply because we lack the ability to decipher the pictograms. Okay, so thank you all, and do the reading in this module. It's very important because I skimmed over a lot of important information that you will find in your reading. Thank you.